World of 2138. In Overlord, the world of 2138 is the real world where Momonga, real name Suzuki Satoru, and the Supreme Beings came from. It's set more than a century in the future, where technology has advanced far beyond our own time. But despite the progress, the planet is dying. Governments have collapsed, corporations control entire nations, and daily life has become harsh. In this bleak reality, the DMMORPG, YGGDRASIL, became a place where Ainz and his friends could escape the world outside. Environmental collapse. In the year 2138, the environment had been wrecked so badly that the surface of the Earth was covered in pollution. Beautiful nature only existed inside video games. It was nothing like the glamorous sci-fi cyberpunk futures people once dreamed of. The year 2138 had become a brutal dystopia. In this world, the sky was always hidden by thick black smog, and the sun only showed up every now and then. Cities lay buried under toxic fog, forcing people to wear gas masks or air filters just to step outside, along with goggles to shield their eyes. Even then, their clothes would still get corroded by the poisoned air. The pollution was so extreme that when Ainz first breathed the clean air of the new world, he immediately realized that people born there didn't need artificial lungs to survive. In Overlord Volume 1, Ainz thinks about Blue Planet when he sees the clear night sky of the new world. You see, Blue Planet had been the one who designed the fake sky on the 6th floor. The way Ainz described it, the blue-white glow of the moon and stars pushed away the darkness. Grasslands moved gently in the wind and seemed to shine on their own. The moon and countless stars lit up the land, glowing alongside the light rising from the earth. Blue Planet, one of the Supreme Beings, started playing YGGDRASIL because he wanted to bring back the natural scenery that had been lost in 2138. He loved nature, even though it had been almost completely destroyed in the real world. In the game, he built the 6th floor with his own hard work, making its night sky a perfect copy of the beautiful world he dreamed of. Ainz remembered how Blue Planet would always get excited, maybe even obsessed, when nature came up in conversation. He wondered how amazed Blue Planet would be if he could see the unpolluted land, water, and air of the new world, and how passionately he would speak about it in his deep voice. Toxic rain and acidic water. Unfortunately, the pollution in 2138 didn't just stop with the air. It ruined the water too. Rivers have turned into strange, ugly colors and were cloudy with filth. The contamination was so bad that water purification systems no longer worked. Even tap water had to be run through a filter before it was safe to drink. And if you think it can't get any worse, just wait for the rainy days. Ainz mentioned that in his era, rain was acidic and had a terrible smell. It was the kind of place where coming across bodies on the street was just part of daily life. Back when Ainz Ooal Gown fought the Ashura in the dungeon raid inside the Great Tomb of Nazareth, the weather reminded some members of just how bad things had been in 2038. They compared it to a berserk torrential acid rainstorm, the kind that would completely fill your vision when you saw it coming down. There's a point in the second half of the Blu-ray 6 prologue where a torrential rainstorm fills the party's vision. It instantly made them think of the acid rain back in the real world. But because they were in the game, the storm vanished right away, and the puddles it left behind didn't cause any damage over time. Food decline. What's worse, gamers in 2038 don't just forget to touch grass. They literally can't. You see, the loss of plants in 2038 made the air even worse. Without sunlight, the greenery that once turned carbon dioxide into oxygen and absorbed nitrogen oxides had withered away. With fewer plants, birds and insects that depended on them for food also began to disappear, along with the fruits they once fed on. Because the planet was so polluted and environmental damage kept getting worse, forests and other beautiful landscapes only survived inside virtual worlds. This means traditional farming, which relied on rainwater and sunlight, almost vanished. All vegetables and grains had to be grown inside domes, and food prices skyrocketed. Fresh fruits and vegetables became rare luxury items that ordinary people couldn't afford. According to the background material from Overlord Manga Volume 3 Special Chapter, by the late 21st century, crop failures and environmental damage were already spreading. By the start of the 22nd century, things only got worse. Advanced environmental destruction and dying crops had pushed society right to the breaking point. Governments stopped functioning properly. Primary industries collapsed, and as food ran out, even restaurants went bankrupt. Fine dining became something only the wealthy living in the so-called arcologies could enjoy. Back in 2038, Ainz used to eat steak-flavored liquid food that was basically just a sticky meat-flavored gel. Since most people considered spending money on food a waste, they didn't care about taste. For them, the important thing was filling one's stomach. If the food wasn't nutritious enough, there were always pills to make up for it. Ainz would swallow several multivitamins and supplements with a gulp of health drink, and that was his 220 yen dinner, or about 150. He usually eats lunch outside, and that was more expensive than the cheapest meal he could get, so he had to save money on breakfast and dinner. Basically, the environmental collapse led to falling wages, higher prices, shrinking food supplies, and, naturally, people going hungry. Raw fruits and vegetables became goods that only the rich or powerful corporations could easily buy. This situation sparked food riots, and scenes like looting of fast food restaurants and stores, blocking off farm and supply trucks, raiding depots, and protests that exploded into violence became commonplace. By then, the only places where farming and crop cultivation were even possible were domes or arcologies. The thing is, these places are controlled environments owned by corporate overlords, where only the rich and influential can live. Corporate rule. By the year 2138, Japan wasn't really run by the government anymore. Huge corporations had taken control in practice, rewriting laws to benefit themselves and keeping the population under their control. At the end of the 21st century, the old system was still barely holding together. But once the riots all across the country had been triggered because of environmental destruction and food shortage, those riots escalated into a coup d'etat. Politicians became targets for the public's anger, and people put them on trial in the streets. When the government's functions were put to a stop, the big conglomerates saw this as a chance. They seized legislative, executive, and judicial power, taking over the country completely. The thing was, they were the ones responsible for the environmental destruction in the first place. If they had cared for the planet, there would have been no food shortages or riots. It was hard not to see the whole chain of events as something they had manipulated from the start. Life for ordinary people was brutal. As one worker put it, health didn't matter anymore. You just kept working like a slave to afford food, even when your body was on the edge of collapse. The rich, meanwhile, had a completely different life. The directors of the corporations and their families lived safely inside autonomous cities called arcologies. To make it worse, these megacorporations will do anything to maintain their power. You see, Bell River, one of the supreme beings, was assassinated in real life after uncovering dangerous secrets about one of the megacorporations. His death was written off as an accident, but it was clear it was meant to silence him. Luckily, the information he had didn't die with him, as it ended up in someone else's hands. Public safety. With the government barely functioning, the police existed only in name. Public safety kept getting worse. Thieves, gangs, and hackers operated openly. That doesn't mean society falls into complete chaos, though. Like Ainz, most people still went to their offices and did their jobs like nothing had changed. Imagine if you leave your job in the real world of 2138. In the past, it was still possible to survive on your own, but that is a dream within a dream in this dystopian era. Due to environmental collapse, seeds planted in the polluted soil would never grow. So, anyone living outside the arcologies would starve. Their only choice is to steal food. For those unwilling to cross that line, the only option was to obey the company and keep working. However, even inside the arcologies, theft and crime were still a big problem. Back in his old home before being pulled into Yggdrasil, Ainz deliberately never fixed his front door. And there are a few reasons. First, because the metal parts were so warped beyond repair, it would have cost him money to replace them. Second, because that awful, ear-piercing screech the door made almost felt like a weird welcome whenever he came back from work. Basically, Ainz got attached to it. But more importantly, that noise worked as a kind of burglar alarm. His reasoning is that nobody would think there was anything valuable hidden behind a door that made this kind of noise. On top of that, Ainz had 3 different locks. Even then, a determined thief could still force their way in. And before they could even reach his innermost room, most likely his gaming room, they'd have to pass through 3 doors first: the toilet, the bathroom, and then the bedroom. Every once in a while, there were attacks aimed at the wealthy members of the megacorporations, but they almost never reached their targets, since the rich lived in isolation, far away from the outside world. In reality, only the rich had the power to fight each other, but when they did, it was the poor who ended up suffering. They were the ones ordered to fight the wars. For these wealthy people, large-scale attacks and looting were just distant problems that happened somewhere else, not in their world. In a world like this, any police officer with strong ideals would naturally be frustrated. One of the supreme beings, Touch Me, is hinted to have been a police officer in real life. According to author Maruyama, on top of being a wealthy man with a beautiful home, Touch Me was married to his childhood friend, had a daughter, and worked for the government. Hiro even once said that Touch Me would arrest any suspicious-looking person he saw. However, with the government no longer working as it should, being a police officer was just a title without real power. Touch Me was the kind of person who enjoyed his job, but seeing the gap between his ideals and the harsh reality must have been painful. Like other passionate officers, he looked for justice somewhere else. And that may have been what led him to Yggdrasil in the first place. If you want to uncover the secrets of Touch Me and every other supreme being in Overlord, I've got a video for you to check out later. And while you're still in Nazarick, pledge your loyalty by hitting that like and subscribe button. Now then, let's keep going. Neural Nano Interface. You see, technology in 2138 had reached the point where helmets like the ones Ainz used could automatically record everything happening in the virtual world. These helmets kept the footage for a month before deleting it. That alone made a lot of people nervous, because wearing one basically meant giving up your privacy. It felt like the government or big corporations could peek straight into your thoughts. But since computer laws made them mandatory, pretty much everyone had to wear one. The helmets hooked up to the Neural Nano Interface and, ironically, even doubled as protection. They connected through a wire at the back of the neck, linked straight to the helmet, and then you'd slide it over your head. Technically, it covered your whole face. But thanks to the camera on the outside feeding video signals directly into your brain, your vision stayed perfectly clear. The Neural Nano Interface was a human brain augmentation that allowed it to function as a super high-performance personal computer. It was essential for daily life, but sometimes they were used in crimes as well. You see, hackers could hijack someone else's brain to commit crimes, which is why recorded data from a helmet could be used to prove innocence. Without one, the chances of being charged for a crime went way up, so only a few people chose not to wear them. When the system booted up, a bunch of windows would pop right into the user's vision, showing them the information flowing into the processor within their brain. To someone from our time, the way people in 2138 moved their hands around might look really strange, but that was just how they used their cranial CPU. It reads the tiny electrical signals from their brain and converts their thoughts directly into data. With the helmet, your thoughts could travel through the cable straight to the supercomputer. You could turn on the TV, bring up an invisible console, or even switch channels just by thinking about it. But before diving into a game like Yggdrasil, players had to refill their supply of nanomachines. That was done with a quick, painless injection. The injector looked like a seal stamp. Press it against your skin, and you'd feel a warm rush spread through your arms and then sweep across your whole body like wildfire. If you didn't top up, there was a good chance you'd get booted out the game halfway through. People in year 2138 could cheaply exchange the empty syringe for a new one at the clinic. But if they broke it, the replacement would be very expensive. Despite having this level of technology though, the world of 2138 didn't have giant piloted robots, except for a few experimental units. However, full conversion cyborgs, known as fullborgs, did exist. The Neural Nano Interface was also what made DMMO RPGs possible. Yggdrasil, released in 2126 by a Japanese company, was one of them. Basically, it is a sensory-based MMO where players connected all 5 senses and feel like they're truly inside the game. The technology behind it had first been developed in 2079 for the military, then adapted for medicine. It was simplified after 10 years and became standard in every home. Even then, it took 15 more years before the first DMMO-RPG was released. One reason Yggdrasil stood out above all others was the massive amount of data it could handle thanks to these Neural Nano Interfaces. Arcology. In 2138, the poor were left to survive in open wastelands with almost no shelter, while the wealthy people lived safely inside arcologies. Arcologies are massive domed megacities run by the corporate overlords. They're a completely enclosed, self-sustaining city, protected from toxins and resource shortages. For comparison, these megacorp-controlled arcologies were far superior to ordinary dome cities. Even so, a dome city was still far better than the harsh environment outside, like the one Ainz had lived in. Some people endured conditions even worse than that. But even though farming inside dome cities and arcologies was enough to keep people fed, it wasn't nearly enough to produce the oxygen needed to keep the atmosphere livable. Back in year 2118, Europe saw the Arcology War, a conflict between various European arcologies. These battles became known as the Euro-Arcology Wars. Wealthy elites, already rich with money and resources, fought each other for dominance while sending the poor to fight and die on their behalf. In fact, the uniforms worn by Pandora's actor, who was created by Ainz, closely resembles the ones worn by Neo-In Army elite guards during these wars. The directors of major corporations took refuge in arcologies, living in total safety alongside their families. Life there was peaceful and luxurious, completely cut off from the outside world suffering. Some employees and affiliates even enjoy how different and so far removed they were from the outside world. Arcologies even grew into independent states, with new cities forming around them as fortified strongholds. Over time, some arcologies went to war with one another, but their goal is merely profit and more power. These cities were entirely under corporate control and were run by powerful business conglomerates that held influence across entire nations, including Japan. At least 3 European arcologies are known, and some of their forces include the Neo-In Army Elite Guards, who took part in the earlier wars, though their exact goals remain unclear. In the Blu-ray 4 special prologue, there's a scene where Ainz is watching the news, and it reports someone getting arrested for selling illegal cyberware in Neo-Kyoto Hachijo. That place, Neo-Kyoto Hachijo, or maybe just Neo-Kyoto itself, was likely one of the arcologies. Education for sale. After the big megacorporations took control of the country, they scrapped the compulsory education system. The excuse was to reduce public spending, but the real goal was to strip the poor of their ability to think. Education exists just to keep the population compliant and disposable. In 2138, even elementary school required tuition. Basic education was expensive, but if you want to get a job that could keep you alive, this is necessary. The thing is, elementary education shouldn't have cost that much, but the wealthy kept prices high to block the poor from getting an education. Poor parents who wanted their kids to have a chance at a decent job still sent them to school, but it wasn't easy. Many worked themselves to exhaustion just to pay tuition. For the rich people, anyone who wasn't wealthy was just a worker bee. They're meant to obey orders and make money for their superiors. Independent thinking was discouraged. Those who questioned orders were labeled troublemakers, harmful to teamwork and public safety. From that perspective, the fewer schools there were, the better. Graduating from elementary school meant you had the minimum knowledge to function as part of the system. For the poor, that was considered a success. Even Ainz, despite being the guildmaster of Ainz Ooal Gown, was only an elementary school graduate, which in itself was a privilege. Ulbert once said that without at least that basic education, you couldn't even serve under the so-called born winners. So the megacorporations made elementary school easy to complete. Both he and Ainz shared that level of schooling. According to the author Maruyama, the web novel version, Ainz's school background was different. There, he had gone to high school and university instead of stopping at elementary level. Underage workers. With education so scarce and expensive, even at the primary level, many children had no choice but to start working at a young age to help support their families. Ainz himself lived that reality. His life became an endless loop of going to the office day after day, and he often saw kids who had just graduated from elementary school working beside him. In Ainz's own case, his mother had passed away early, and his father didn't care enough to support him financially. That meant Ainz had to start working immediately after finishing elementary school just to survive. In his world, child labor was common, and there were surely people living in even harsher situations than his. The harsh reality is that families that still tried to send their children to school often paid the price on their own health and well-being, sacrificing themselves to cover tuition. Death from overwork. In the world 2138, company employees were little more than expendable tools. They were worked to exhaustion, treated without dignity, and yet fewer ever dared to rebel. Unfortunately, anyone who defied their corporate masters would be cast out and left to starve in a world where survival without a company's backing was nearly impossible. That's why, for some, the cruelty of the system was personal. Ulbert had lost both of his parents to hazardous working conditions. Their death was met with small, even miserable amounts of compensation. Even with their employees losing their lives, these businesses will take no pause in production. The lives of workers were worth less than the profits they generated. Ainz's own loss was just as bitter. You see his mother, already worn down by overwork, collapsed while preparing his favorite meal, her body basically giving out before she ever thought to rest. By the time Ainz found her, it was far too late. At least, that's how Ainz remembers it. His memory's a bit hazy on that count. Perhaps that memory lingered in the back of his mind when he chose the path of an Overlord, which is the pinnacle of the undead Elder Lich line. In that form, he would never again feel hunger, thirst, or the weakness of a body pushed past its limits. In the end, Ainz could only wonder, if his mother had just rested instead of worrying so much, maybe she'd still be alive. And then, in volume 15, there's this moment where Ainz finishes a workday that doesn't even last half an hour. It leaves him feeling kind of conflicted. Normally, his work starts around 10 in the morning and wraps up before noon, but finishing everything in just 30 minutes felt way too fast. This was something he hadn't experienced back when he was still a salaryman in the world of 2138. Swing shifts aside, there is also excessive overtime. That said, it wasn't rare for those employed by megacorporations to start work late. According to Ulbert and the work environment of the megacorporations, being allowed to work late at 10 a.m. is not unheard of, but a kind of privilege in itself. Another supreme being, Hero Hero, shares the same experience, maybe even worse than Ainz or Ulbert. In his real life, Hero Hero was a salaryman trapped in the clutches of an exploitative corporation, the kind of black-hearted enterprise that worsens the health and spirit of its workers. In Chapter 65 of the Overlord, the Undead O, his job demands were so relentless that he even missed a guild meeting. He is also forced to attend a public apology press conference on behalf of his company. After changing jobs at one point, Hero all but vanished from Yggdrasil. He hadn't quit outright, but 2 years passed without him logging in. The endless overtime left him too drained to play. Even when he made it home, exhaustion followed him, and the only relief came from sleep. That is, when he could find it. Hero's stress had reached the point where he needed medical checkups to rule out illness, and sleep-inducing medicine just to rest at all. The constant fatigue dulled his reflexes, blurred his memory, and left him feeling far older than his actual age. His friends from Ainz Ooal Gown reassured him that it was the job that was eroding him, but the line between the two was becoming hard to see. On the nights when rest refused to come, he would sometimes log back into Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil. You see, in the world of 2138, outdoor leisure had become a fantasy of the poor. Because the air itself was poisonous, even the thought of playing sports under an open sky was impossible. Renting an indoor court was a luxury far beyond the means of most families. The mountains and oceans had been reduced to polluted wastelands, killing tourism entirely. And yet, in their carefully rationed mercy, the Arcology Megacorps granted people short block holidays, which are usually 3 days off in the summer. That was why, in 2138, games became the one place without borders. For those trapped in cramped apartments and suffocating schedules, the only leisure activities left are cheap and can be done at home. For example, a few old board games like Shogi and Go, low-cost movie streams, and most of all, DMMO RPGs like Yggdrasil. Inside a game, players could see majestic mountains, clear oceans, and ancient forests without breathing in toxins. They could meet strangers from across the world, do quests, explore vast scenery, or build the kind of home they could never afford in reality. Some even found romance. Yggdrasil's popularity wasn't only because of its quality, though its complexity was unmatched, but because it gave millions an escape from reality. Even in a divided society, Yggdrasil shattered those borders. In fact, members of the guild Ainz Ooal Gown came from across different social classes. Some are residents of the arcologies in dome cities, survivors of collapsing urban slums, and those living in environments even more degraded than Ainz's own life. And yet they became comrades. They even hold offline meetings sometimes. Ainz himself has one piece of real-world luxury. He has a high-end reclining chair from one of the big 8 corporations. It was complete with a footrest, remote controls, and its own wheeled side table. In his tiny apartment, it was probably the single most expensive object he owned. And he uses this thing when exploring Yggdrasil's world. See, the game's appeal lies in its amount of detail. Unlike standard fantasy worlds restricted to humans, elves, and dwarves, Yggdrasil lets players choose from over 420 races, including demi-humans like goblins and orcs, and monstrous heteromorphic races with unique abilities. Players could mix and match from roughly 880 classes, stacking dozens if they met the conditions, though such variety often came at the cost of raw strength. Its creator tools allowed for limitless customization. For instance, a necromancer could raise a dragon's corpse as an undead, a berserker could bathe in its blood for power, and an alchemist could grind its bones into medicine. In most games, a slain creature's body would vanish, but that is different in Yggdrasil. There are 9 vast realms: the Asgard, Alfheim, Vanaheim, Nidavellir, Midgard, Jotunheim, Niflheim, Helheim, and Muspelheim. And each one is massive, several times larger than the entire city of Tokyo. And yet, even here, it wasn't all butterflies and rainbows. Players who chose heteromorphic races, like the members of Ainz Ooal Gown, were often hunted for player killing by other players. Simply because of having monstrous forms, they still can't escape discrimination. The bitter irony was that these games were products of the same megacorporations that poisoned the air, ruined education, controlled the masses, and destroyed the world. And that's everything we know about the world of 2138. But I want to hear from you. If you had to live in this world, would you survive or log into Yggdrasil and never come back? Drop your answers below, and click here before the server shut down for good.